So here we are.
Here we are indeed. Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown, Episode 5. It is the Dark and Stormy Night edition. We are here in Nashua, New Hampshire, and it is stormy and rainy, and we've left the windows open so that you who are listening, you who have dared to go on the journey of Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown, can get the kind of ambiance that we're getting. I think it's perfect, dude.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So today we are delving in. Do you want to intro this? Because I'm not still fully clear on what it is that we're discussing, but it's
basically a continuation.
How do we articulate it? Go ahead.
So last week we spent a lot of time talking about Genesis and the creation myths and things like that. And I think that where we landed with all that was a short discussion about, was Genesis actually used as kind of a pass-fail test to get into, the more esoteric training that would be offered in some of these religions, right?
Right.
And I think that idea has a lot of merit, and it not only just for Genesis, but for the entire Torah. If you look at the first 5 books, I think the entire thing could be interpreted as a sort of, not really an IQ test, but more of a, how aware are you of the things you're reading and the world around you and the history that came before you and that sort of thing. And I really do think that this idea has legs, and we should continue down that path.
So one thing that I think about when you mention that is that it could be that is backed up, I think, by the idea and the amount of fervor that the rabbinical tradition has for studying those first, like for really getting in, really studying, really discussing it. Like, that is such a big part of the Jewish priesthood culture.
Yes.
To get in, and even to this day, to tear apart verse by verse and debate and argue about what it means. And it seems to me like I play out the scenario in my head of like the early, what would have been the priest class, right? This early priest class before they were rabbis per se, but it was like, this is the power elite. I could really see them using this form of back and forth debate and analysis, particularly in front of another group or an audience, as a way of establishing the hierarchy of, among aspirant initiate priests, to sort of be like, in front of the masters, to be like, okay, who is the person here who we should be looking towards as a possible leader for our tribe moving forward? What do you think about that idea?
Possibly. I think that the knowledge that has been encoded goes beyond Judaism. It goes beyond, the rabbinical studies. I think a lot of the effort being put into this by, rabbis and Jewish scholars really tends to be more of like a confirmation bias exercise, right? Where they're trying to make the things fit. Like, for example, and we'll talk about this a lot more later, but Moses' name, there is no possible way that it is a Hebrew name. Right. Moses is not Hebrew. It is an Egyptian name. Right. But yet you will find these lengthy explanations of why it has to be a Hebrew name. And it's just like, come on, you're really just arguing something that has no basis to stand on.
Well, see, but that almost says to me that, because every culture eventually becomes like a cargo cult. Like anything that you do within a culture that at some time perhaps had utility eventually becomes it's like a cargo cult, right? Like, people don't know why they're doing this particular thing. And so I think that it's like you start to value, well, what do they say about bureaucracy? Like, it's valuing like process or procedure over product.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, once you get into a level of established bureaucracy, the end product no longer matters. What matters is that you go through a certain motion. So you would think that if, like, okay, if you lose what the end product is, like if you lose that, what it is that you're trying to get to, and if what it was that they were trying to get to was, this is a sort of a joust, this is a sort of a tournament, a game of intellect that we're going to go through. But that also has a level of cynicism to it, I think, right? Because in order to approach the book that way, which I think is perhaps the way that we're approaching the book, you also have to not, in a sense, not be a believer. You have to be able to see behind the curtain of,
Sure.
no, this is a tool for organization and control of a group of people. Now, that may be benign control, that may be pathological control, but we're looking at it from a different... You understand where I'm going with that?
I do, but I would also add that it could also be a mechanism for the preservation of knowledge that might not be all that popular to preserve. So
Fair enough.
It's really more of an encoding, because there have been times where esoteric knowledge has been suppressed, and I mean it's still being suppressed. So I mean, different degrees throughout history, and a lot of those esoteric teachings only survived because they were not entirely visible to just anyone looking at a particular work. So,
Right.
I do think that, perhaps there is a certain level of cynicism, but then there's also, I think, a genuine desire to preserve some occult knowledge in those first 5 books that shouldn't be accessible to just every man. Right? It should be hidden. It should be available to the adept. But it's yeah. So I don't think it necessarily precludes belief, but there is definitely a different purpose than just what people have assumed over the years.
Okay, so we did a little bit of Genesis. When we had spoke about, well, what are we going to do this week? You had an idea of perhaps taking it back a little further, maybe delving into, is that what we're going to do today? How do you envision us moving forward on this?
Well, actually, I think just going forward a bit, right? Like,
okay,
so we
let's
talked about Genesis, we talked about the creation mythology, and there's, I mean, honestly, we could spend weeks just talking about that, but I think it might be helpful to go a little forward. And you had recommended a book last week, and it was by Sigmund Freud, Moses and Monotheism. And so I do what I always do. I bought the book and I read it. And
Fair enough.
It was great. It was really, really interesting. And the critiques of the book were not necessarily like, oh, he's totally wrong, this blah, 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 Actually, the critiques generally were from the this can't possibly be true because I've believed this other stuff my whole life.
Right.
So this guy's full of crap. That's not a valid objection, right? If your objection is based on subjectivity and opinion, it's not an objection. If you want to object on the facts, cool. We can do that all day long. That's what we do.
Right.
So I thought that one of the first things that Freud did was he referenced one of his students, one of his colleagues, who had actually done a fairly extensive overview of the mythology around heroes and the origin, the hero story, right? Because if you're going to influence a large number of people, you need a familiar archetype.
Right. See, what's interesting about that to me is I almost wonder if Joseph Campbell would not have read that, because this is only published about 10 years before Hero with a Thousand Faces. So it's interesting. I noticed that as well. And he was a professor of comparative religion. So you would figure this would probably be a book that he would have picked up. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Go
no.
ahead. It just seemed like an interesting...
Absolutely. And the thing is, I don't know that, Sigmund Freud, huge name during his lifetime. I mean, he was a giant. He was a giant in his particular profession. If he's publishing a book on Moses, you're going to read it. If you're at all, if you're into comparative religions, you're reading that book.
Absolutely.
So I don't think it's, feasible to think that he was unaware of this work. So what Freud's colleague, I can't remember the guy's name. I think it was like, I want to say like Rice or Reed or something that started with an R. Anyway, so he had done this review, and no fewer than like 15 historic heroes all had very similar origin stories. Very, very similar. And, so we talk about, I just picked a few. But let's start with Sargon of Akkad, right? Okay. So, Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah, not the YouTube star.
No.
The actual guy that he's named himself after.
The real Sargon, 2400 BC.
Okay.
And this is really the earliest documented hero birth myth that we currently have.
Now, is he a mythological character or is he a historical character, Sargon?
Of all the people on this list, he is the most real.
Okay.
He has the most documented evidence of his actual existence.
Okay.
He was a real person. Now, whether or not the facts of his birth are true to life, I don't know. It could have been an embellishment. Like, this guy's awesome and here's why. And it was like, bragging or whatever. But he was a real person.
Okay, got it.
So interestingly enough, let's talk about the similarities, right? So most of your hero birth myths will have certain things in common as far as their conception and the birth being difficult. There's some sort of external danger factor. There is, usually a setting adrift on a river. Usually it is in a little basket made of reed, and they're saved. Usually they are born of royalty and saved by somebody poor or of a lower class, but sometimes that's reversed, like in the Moses story.
Right. That's story.
And then that person goes on to become some great hero or great person in history.
Okay.
But yeah, so Sargon, real person. He was born of a Vestal, and if you're familiar with Vestals, Vestals were the female priestesses of Vesta, and they refer to them as the Vestal Virgins.
Right.
So, having a child, especially when there is, an unknown father, like nobody knows who the father is, she gave birth in hiding, and, they take a vow of chastity, these Vestal Virgins.
Right. They're like nuns.
Very much like nuns. Okay. And so, being pregnant, having a child, totally out of bounds.
Not
so
cool.
She did it in secret. Once the baby was born, she made a basket out of reeds, sealed it with pitch, and set sail on the river. Sargon was saved by Aki, the water carrier, and became a gardener. So he was raised as Aki's son, became a gardener, which is interesting if you think about the whole Garden of Eden thing. But then he went on to become the first king and founder of the Akkadian Empire.
Okay.
Fairly big deal at the time, predecessor of Babylon.
Pretty big deal, yeah.
Pretty big deal. So then let's fast forward. So if we fast forward about 1,000 years, we get to Moses.
All right.
Same story, born into slavery to a Hebrew mother who hid him because Pharaoh had ordered the killing of all newborn Hebrew boys. So she makes a basket out of reeds sealed with pitch, sets him sail on the river, and saved by Pharaoh's daughter. So here you have the inversion. You don't have, royal birth and then poor savior. You have poor birth and royal savior. So saved by Pharaoh's daughter, he becomes the prophet, deliverer, and lawgiver of Israel, and very likely an amalgamation of multiple people. Now, I do have a theory about who I think he may be.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, no, I want to save that for a little bit.
Oh, you're saving it.
I'm saving it. I'm saving it. It's kind of a big reveal at the end.
Fair enough. All right.
Not the end of the show, but just,
all right.
A few minutes from now. But
okay.
But I really do think that there is a basis in the Moses story, in reality, in actual history. It just may be a collection of people rather than just a single individual.
Got it.
One more, Karna, and this is a character from the Mahabharata, 700 to 800 BC, born to a virgin, unmarried princess who called upon the sun god to give her a child. The sun god is going to come up a lot in this conversation. So the sun god's like, sure, here you go. Boom. You got a baby. And then she's like, oh my God, I'm an unwed mother and I've just had an illegitimate son of a sun god.
That's tough. That's a tough place to be.
It's like, who do you go to for advice at that point? I'm not really sure. So she makes a basket out of rushes, which I think are reeds.
Those are reeds.
Yeah, and seals it with wax. And
same as pitch.
Sets him sail on the river. He's saved by a charioteer of the king and his wife. He becomes a warrior who conquers the world and then becomes king of Anga. Fictional character. But the archetype is exactly, almost exactly. Close enough, right? There's a lot of similarity.
So this is a clearly a common. It's also the story of Superman, is it not?
It's funny because I have that written right here.
Yes.
I wrote Superman, born to scientists on a dying planet. The planet was dying. Destruction was imminent. And his father puts him in a life pod, shoots him off into space. He's rescued by farmers. And then becomes a mighty hero, truth, justice, American way, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's the same story.
It is exactly the same story.
And Joseph Campbell would say it is because the Superman story is written that way that it became popular. And that of course it was the beginning of what I would call the modern a rebirth, a renaissance of the mythology of the ancients, brought back in. Again, we see it recurring. It is the story of it's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is also the origin story for Osiris, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So it's just over and over and over and over again.
There are elements that are shared by Oedipus, by Gilgamesh, by Jesus, by Paris. There are so many. There's like 15 of these heroes who started off in very, very similar ways. I just picked the ones that were the most similar. I didn't want to go through the entire list, but it's hilarious. When you said Superman, I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny, because I know you didn't read my notes in advance or anything.
No, of course not.
But it just goes to show, brain waves are in sync, man. It's weird.
Well, it's. I've been obsessed with the hero archetype for a very long time, and the weirdest experience. This was a truly I've had quite a few synchronicities that were on a psychedelic level.
Wow.
This is one of them related to the hero's journey, and people can check this out for themselves. I would say the spring, through the spring and summer of 2010, I really just became obsessed for some reason. I don't know why it happened. No, actually, that is not true. I do know why it happened. A buddy of mine had recommended that I read David Mamet's book, 3 Uses of the Knife.
Huh, never heard of it.
Very interesting book. Worth a read. It's short. It's basically David Mamet, the classic or lauded and award-winning screenplay playwright, right? Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, amongst others, writing his treatise on what is drama, answering this question: what is drama? And it's incredibly, incredibly interesting and eye-opening book. And in there, that was the first time that I had heard the mention of Joseph Campbell and of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So this is probably 2009. So I went out, just Hero with 1,000 Faces just went through it, and the Cosmogonic Cycle just went through it. And then I just started obsessively trying to find anything that I could of Joseph Campbell. At that time, it was a lot of it on BitTorrent and a lot of that, at finding all these old speeches and everything. And I was just obsessed, listening over and over and over, and then starting to see these archetypes everywhere. And then in the fall of 2010 was when I basically got a call to go and be on the show Gigolos, right? Now, they had shot like a little, what do they call it? A sizzle, it's not a sizzle. It was kind of like a teaser episode, right? I guess it's like a sizzle. It was. So
it's not like a full-blown pilot. It's like shorter.
It's like 15-minute long pilot, something like that. It was only a half-hour long show, but it basically was laid out in the way that they wanted to lay it out. So I wasn't on. It was 4 other guys, and they were looking for one more guy. They were like, something's missing here, and like this is kind of what we need.
Yeah, how did they not come to you first? I don't get that. That's so weird.
Well, they had actually already filmed it when I met my agent. When I actually became involved, they had already filmed it.
Wow.
So he let me know that when I first met him, and then he said he just told me, Vin, you're on the show. Don't say no. and so I went out and I did the show, and like. I wasn't thinking one way or the other about this particular show. I didn't know the producers. I didn't really know the guys very well. I didn't know much about reality TV at that time or how it was put together or anything like that. And then I saw the first episode. Now, mind you, I had spent like most of that year just obsessed with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And I watched the episode and I was like, oh shit. They did the hero's journey narrative, because I was wondering, like, why on earth would Showtime do a reality? I mean, they had like the L Word, the real L Word, and some other little reality shows or whatever. The producers laid this thing out as a hero's journey, like down to the like you could lay it almost shot for shot of like Lord of the Rings. So it's like Lord of the Rings starts out with the Lord of the Rings movies start out with Gandalf in his little cart, like traveling to the Shire, right? Because the beginning is like the known world, and you've got to set up the known world. Then you have the call to adventure. Then you have refusal of the call. Those are and so it's like this it's set up that way. Well, the beginning is like you could lay the two, and I have next to each other. And the beginning is like my agent in a limo with the phone, like calling to one of the other guys, and then him meeting me like in the same way. And I was like, oh, because I'm supposed to be the new guy. Like that's how it's set up from the beginning. It's like I'm the new guy being introduced to this group of heroes, right? And I've just kind of like arrived. And I called the producer and I was like, whose name is Campbell, by the way, Alex Campbell. And I was like, You fucking did the hero's journey. You did the hero's journey, and you cast me as the hero. And he was like, "Oh yeah, of course we did. Why would we do anything else?" And it was like, fast forward 6 years later, cult hit. Showtime didn't spend $1 on marketing. They didn't even put out press releases. The last season they put out a tweet. They tweeted that the show was coming out.
Yep.
And it still has. I mean, it hasn't been on for almost 3 years now. It hasn't been filmed. It still is airing on Showtime in the normal slot in reruns. People are still obsessed.
Yeah.
They're still obsessed with the show. People catch on and they're obsessed with the show, and they don't know why. And that's what and Joseph Campbell had said, we see this when we see these archetypes, there's nothing we can do. We don't know why. We're just
Yeah, but think about this. I mean, you have the old familiar tale, but with the twist of naughtiness and sexuality and steamy heat. I mean,
well, but here's the thing.
That is not resist.
It's not. It doesn't matter though whether you've ever heard. And this is what I've thought about a lot. And Joseph Campbell talks about it too, because he, in some ways, he never comes out and says it, but he really insinuates that he thinks that this is a biological pattern, which Jung would agree with, that the archetypes are like in us genetically. And so it's not that it's an old tale necessarily, right? It doesn't matter how many times you've seen it. You don't like it because you're familiar with the story. And as a matter of fact, we see the story over and over and over and over again, and it's blockbuster after blockbuster after. It's Harry Potter to The Matrix to Star Wars. I mean, George Lucas, you could go and see George Lucas giving an award to Joseph Campbell and saying, I always wanted to make a space opera, and if I hadn't come across Hero with a Thousand Faces, I would still be trying to make the space opera. Like, he literally just read Hero with a Thousand Faces and just put it right in. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it doesn't matter how many times you see it. It doesn't matter how many times it's been played out over history. But I wonder who discovered it. Or was it just by happenstance that this basic framework was found by somebody, and then they just kept rehashing it and repeating it? Or is it possible that it came up in multiple places all at the same time because it's just built into the human DNA?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? I mean, if it really is something that is endemic to humanity, then we would expect it to arise in disconnected locations across the world with, no interaction between the populations. Because if it is part of us, then people are going to have very similar ideas. If it was just the result of, one brilliant person who thought it up and then everybody just loved it, then we would have a harder time explaining how it ended up in so many stories throughout history from so many disconnected, realms. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there is an argument to be made for, whatever it was, the original, there are only 7 possible stories or whatever it was.
Right, yeah.
Maybe that is just humanity. Maybe that's the human experience. Maybe that's what we have, and there is really nothing outside of that.
So when we're talking about Genesis, when we're talking about where that comes from, are we, and you have a theory that Moses is multiple people, is their use of the Moses story, is that them telling their own? So I guess basically what I'm asking is, we've got the 5 books of Moses.
Yes.
And Moses happens to be in the 5 books of Moses, meaning that it's something of a autobiography, if we're to take it that Moses is a author. Is this a telling of a story before, or is the, because you would think that the people who are experiencing this would have at least some historical knowledge of whether or not this had actually happened? Are they accepting this on face value? Do they think this is a myth? Do they consider this to be history, or is it something else altogether? So
I think there's a couple interesting aspects to that. I mean, there's a ton of interesting stuff here, but a couple things that we want to focus on. So let's first talk about what Freud said in his book, because I'll save everybody the time. I read it for you, so you don't have to.
There you go.
All right. So Freud's theory, in a nutshell, is that Moses was actually teaching the new Egyptian monotheistic religion that was established by Amenhotep IV.
Also known as Akhenaten.
Akhenaten, exactly, which is probably more familiar to the audience. This occurred during the 18th dynasty. So Amenhotep IV became pharaoh. He changed his name to Akhenaten, like you just mentioned, which means effective for Aten. Aten being the sun god.
So we got the sun god again.
Yes, we have the sun god again, and the sun god being promoted to, like, the only god, right? So we've removed all the other gods, and we just have the sun god, Aten. He forcefully established this monotheism throughout Egypt. There was a lot of stick and not a lot of carrot.
Got it.
He implemented circumcision, for example. That was another part of this, which usually gets skipped over. Circumcision was very Egyptian, believe it or not.
It still is. Female genital, if you want to call it FGM, female genital mutilation, but circumcision in the rural tribal areas is almost universal among Egyptian. I don't know about the men, but Egyptian women for sure.
Well, this was specific to the men, but
Interesting.
the whole thing about circumcising women should just be abolished immediately. That's a horrible.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my God,
Absolutely.
that is one of the. When I had never heard of it until several years ago, and I think I'm still traumatized. It is a horrible thing.
Agreed.
I don't even want to think about it.
100%.
I'm going to need more wine.
Go ahead. Go at it. Go at it.
It's like, thanks, you're making me drink. Twist my arm.
There we go. Thank you, sir. Okay, continue. I'm sorry. So we've
No.
reached Akhenaten, the
Reformer.
the reformer.
Yes.
Okay.
Akhenaten the Reformer.
All right.
Almost sounds like a superhero. So that's really Freud's theory, right? Like, okay, we have all of this supporting evidence where we can probably say that, Moses was really just implementing the monotheism from Egypt because he was Egyptian. So he presented this evidence saying, obviously the guy is not a Hebrew who was set sail on the Nile and picked up by a pharaoh's daughter. He was Egyptian, and he was probably somebody important. He was probably a priest. And, so then as a priest, he took this monotheism and, brought it to his people, which is another thing that Freud says in the book is, it wasn't that God necessarily selected a people. I know that is how it is interpreted a lot, God's chosen people. But Freud was looking at it more from the standpoint that it was actually Moses' chosen people.
Now, I'm not recalling if this was in Moses and Monotheism that I read this, but I have a feeling that it was. Does Freud say that this was the Habiru? Is he the one who says that this is the Habiru people of the Sinai Peninsula?
Yes, the Habiru, and how close that is to Hebrew,
right?
And and there's also a theory that it could be related to the Hyksos. So I mean, there's a lot of that kind of difficult to pin down. Are these the people that we're talking about? There's also an entirely separate legend where there is actually a named person in Egypt who collects all the lepers and takes them away and then changes his name to Moses. I know, it's like, wow,
Okay, that's weird.
Yeah, I left that out of this particular episode just because I think that, I'm not sure how realistic that scenario
and now
is.
That's an Egyptian story too.
It's
though,
an Egyptian
isn't it?
story, yeah.
So couldn't that just be like a form of propaganda, like a form of slander against this individual?
Absolutely, and the Jews were referred to as being like lepers,
right?
And
right.
so
this is like Saint Patrick kicking the snakes out of Ireland.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So we know that description of the snakes we're talking about the Celts. We're talking about the Celtic people. And it's meant as a form of slander, although you question, as we talked about last time with the serpent and that sort of, if it maybe doesn't have a deeper meaning of something like non-believers,
sure,
right? Something like infidels, I guess, right?
Yeah, anybody whose beliefs are not aligned,
right,
enough,
right. So, okay.
But, yeah, I definitely think that is one of those stories that we should probably revisit at some point. I just didn't, I didn't really have time to integrate that into my theory. And, I'm like, man, I got to get this theory out there. It's a lot of fun.
Fair enough.
All right. So here's where I want to diverge a bit or build upon what Freud had set up, right?
Okay.
So Amenhotep III, right? It's talking about the father of Amenhotep IV, who became Akhenaten. So Amenhotep III had another son, Tutmosis.
Tutmosis, yeah.
Which
is Thoth.
Yes.
Thothmosis.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is where it gets weird.
Okay.
He was the elder son. He was in line to be pharaoh. And then, and this is what the historians are saying, he, quote unquote, apparently died. There is no record of his death. There is no proof of his, I'm sure he died at some point, but there's no proof that he died right then, which is when he vanished from the public record. So it's like eldest son, eldest son, eldest son, and then boop, he doesn't exist anymore. And then we have the guy who became Akhenaten, who was the younger brother. So here's my theory, right? It's like Tutmosis vanished just a few years before the end of his father's reign, right? It was very close to the end. There's no record of his death whatsoever. There was an assumption that he had died. What if he didn't die at that point?
Go on.
What if him and his younger brother hatched a plan based on the younger brother's new religion, because it would have been in play. I mean, he would have known. Like, the brothers would have been talking about the new religion because they were planning to be Pharaoh.
Yes,
and they knew Dad's time on Earth was short.
Got it.
So there had to be all of this planning that was occurring that, okay, once I become Pharaoh, then, we're going to take the new religion and we're going to make everybody adherents to our new religion. So, a few years before Dad passes away, what if the older brother came to the younger brother and said, we're going to get a lot of resistance. The Egyptians aren't going to like this. They are going to, they're going to fight us on this. And honestly, like, I don't think it's going to survive beyond, like, our reign. Like, if I'm Pharaoh, when I'm done being Pharaoh, they're just going to go back to the way they were doing it before. So what I want to do is I'm going to disappear. You'll become the new heir. You'll be Pharaoh. Implement the new religion that we've come up with. I am going to go off outside of Egypt and try to set up a new group with the religion in the hopes that it will survive beyond our reign. Now, if everything works out great here in Egypt, awesome, it'll survive, great. But I'm telling you, I don't think the people are going to like it. And we need something outside of Egypt to keep this thing going.
I think that I want to explore this. I want to explore this. When you first mentioned this, you first started in on this, I had a different image pop into my head of a different scenario. But what I first want to explore before I lay that one out is, in the Exodus story, we have Moses being raised by, that his brother in that case is Ramses.
And he also has a brother, Aaron.
Right. Now this doesn't necessarily have to be like historically accurate, but brothers are in play. That's the first thing that I want to say, right? Brothers are important to this story.
Yes.
And that one brother becomes king and the other brother leaves. And the Moses story has the brother that leaves to be the righteous brother.
Yes.
I want to present this maybe in a different way, and I think that this is good in terms of going back to the idea of the priest class, right? The priest class is very important within Judaism. That becomes the dominant class. It's not a, we don't have Moses going out and it's not a king, it's not a new pharaoh thing. It's definitely the priest class developing a hierarchy and a way of ruling for themselves. Like, in some ways, this is the first time in history, I think, that we see the leadership of the intelligentsia as opposed to the leadership of the warrior, right? The king. I think this is, right? I think Judaism kind of represents that. I'm thinking this scenario. Same idea. Brother Tutmosis,
who was a priest.
Both of these guys, as sons of the Pharaoh, are going to be raised by priest class teachers.
Oh, sure.
Right?
The best.
And these guys are really the power behind the throne. They know the science. They're responsible for the astrology, which is very, very important, and astronomy is very important in Egypt, because these are the guys who are able to tell when the floods are about to start, which is when they start,
everything.
when they end. That's literally their entire civilization is based upon these guys. So these guys like control whether people live or die.
Yeah.
And they're keeping this knowledge to themselves, right? We know this because it's got like hieroglyphics. They had two forms of writing.
Mm-hmm.
They had hieratics, which actually a lot of people knew. The scribes knew it, all of that. And then they had hieroglyphic. And hieratics was like our writing. It was like phonetic. You would read. There was letters and all of that. Then they had hieroglyphics, which sometimes you read it up to down, sometimes back to forth. There were different things, could mean the same thing in a different context. It was like hieratics was always written on paper. Hieroglyphics was always on stone. And they would put it out in public because no one else could read it. It was almost like, we'll put this here and we know what it means. You can't read it, but it would be in total public view. These were not messages it was like this. What a power trip.
That's cool.
Right? What a power trip that here's all these people walking around and here's all these symbols and they can't read them at all.
It's like walking through Washington, D.C.
That's exactly what it's like, right? Well, that's the Masonic influence. And so these guys are raised in the mystery schools. Tutmosis and his brother Akhenaten. So what I'm thinking is perhaps it's a little bit different. Perhaps they're both raised within this priest class, and perhaps what we see is a fracturing of the priest class itself, right? So perhaps we've got powerful priests who have begun to, because there's no reason to think that it was actually Akhenaten himself who developed this religion. I think it's reasonable to believe that there had been priests for a while sort of formulating these ideas and maybe introduced it to him.
So my read of the what historians I could digest in last week was that he's really referred to as like the first like individual thinker like ever. Like people revere this guy because not necessarily that he was right or he treated his people great or whatever, but he was truly an original thinker. And he's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm doing my own thing. I don't care what you taught me. I don't care what I learned in school. I'm doing it this way. This is the way it is. And, maybe obviously there has to be some origin to the belief. Unless it came to him in an experience, in a dream, in a vision, something like that. I don't know.
I just wonder, how does the elder son wind up? I mean, okay, I could maybe, I guess I could maybe see a scenario. Okay, how about this scenario? Let me lay this one out. The entire establishment wants and is expecting Tutmosis to become Pharaoh.
Yes, absolutely.
He's got to become Pharaoh. There's no question about whether or not he's going to become Pharaoh. But if Akhenaten and Tutmosis, if they're close as brothers, if this does come to him, and if Tutmosis is convinced by this, that perhaps he leaves on his own not to make this thing survive, but perhaps he leaves on his own so that his brother can take over. I mean, this is the story that happens during World War II in England, where you have a king basically for love of a woman give up his crown, and his brother then takes it. Mm-hmm. His younger brother then takes it. So it's like this. It's not unheard of in those scenarios, but perhaps it was like because he couldn't stick around. He couldn't stick around or be killed.
No, I mean, well, okay. So one explanation is that he was not down with what Akhenaten wanted to do, so Akhenaten killed him. I mean, that's one plausible explanation. But I'm thinking, what if it was more interesting? What if it was that the brothers together wanted to go monotheistic, and they came up on this plan where the younger brother was going to be Pharaoh and implement monotheism in Egypt. The older brother was going to take the teaching out in the wilderness, hike for 40 years through the desert and teach it out there, with the hopes that one of the two teachings, would persist.
Which it did.
Well, barely. So when Akhenaten, and he was only Pharaoh for like 17 or 18 years. It was a very short reign. And once his reign was over, that was it. The Egyptians were like, thank God that guy's gone. We're going to get back all of our old religion. We're going to, erase his name from everything. We're going to wipe him out. So it was not well received by the Egyptians themselves, and they couldn't wait to get rid of it. If indeed Moses was Tutmosis, Moses could have just been a code name. It could have, just been like, hey, just call me Moses. Kind of like what you were saying about, call me a nickname. Everybody, all the contemporaries would have known who he was, but anybody outside the group wouldn't have known that this was an important guy from Egypt. He was just a dude.
I like this. I like the idea of also, Moses going up again, hieroglyphics written on stone. The idea of going up and retrieving the law and coming back with stone tablets. This would be something that an Egyptian priest would do to bring back and say, these are the hieroglyphic tablets that I'm going to bring back. I think there's a lot. I mean, also, the building of the Ark of the Covenant and listing off of all of the very specific dimensions and the specifications of this. This is the type of thing that at that time this would be in the domain of an Egyptian priest. The builders. That's what they would be doing.
Correct, because Tutmosis prior to this was a priest of Ptah, P-T-A-H, who was a god of the builders.
There you go.
There you go. One could say masons.
Now, interestingly enough, if we're going to play this out, it's a kind of a fateful story, if you will, because of course, then that would mean that this Akhenaten cult was then sort of morphed. And the thing is, like, we don't actually even know how far away. It may just be cosmetic, the difference between Judaism as laid out in the Torah and the cult of the Aten. We really don't know how close they could have been because the cult of the Aten was so far wiped out. But we have Judaism going up, establishing itself in Judea and Israel. We have the old Egyptian gods taking back over. Then we have, of course, Alexander the Great sweeping through 300 BC or so, and
great library,
and taking over all of those areas. Installing after he dies, Ptolemy, of course, takes over, and it's about 275 years until Cleopatra that the Ptolemies, that the Macedonians are the pharaohs of Egypt. I think if this is the story, I think it becomes very ironic that the old gods were unable to save themselves from first the Greeks and then the Romans, whereas through Christianity, the new religion went first and into the Greek world, because much of the New Testament is written in Greek, including Revelation, and then took over the Roman world. So you see that the Aten cult, as it moved, as it grew, as it changed in form, actually beat the Romans. But the Romans beat the cult of the old Egyptian gods. So you see which god is more powerful in that regard.
But the funny thing is, it was touch and go there for quite a long time, because even while Moses was leading his people through the wilderness, they rebelled so many times. I mean, we had the golden calf, we had the consistent rebellion.
Isn't this them going back to the old Egyptian ways?
Yeah, they're resisting, just like the people in Egypt resisted. They didn't want to follow along, but the Pharaoh had, Akhenaten had the power of the military behind him, and he could just bash people over the head if they didn't obey. Moses couldn't do that.
Why is the polytheistic Egyptian cult? Is it just tradition? Why does it have the mimetic value to hang on? Why does the monotheistic religion, why is it not satisfying when introduced? Why is it not like an iPhone? You know what I mean? Because it clearly is a I want to say better technology for organization. What do you think is missing at that time that gets added later? Because you just don't see people like going and really want, or do we? That's the question. Have we not left it? Because I mean, there's a lot more people that go to the latest Marvel movie, than that go to church.
Sure. So here's what I think was actually going on during that time period, right? I think you had the vast majority of people who had become accustomed to a certain style of life in Egypt. Now, although they were slaves, in theory, I mean, the historical accuracy of exactly how they were treated, yes, I'm sure they were, treated poorly, but they were lamenting the absence of what they called flesh pots, the flesh pots of Egypt. This was actually in Freud's book.
What is a flesh pot?
I had to look it up because my first thought was, it's got to be a sexual thing, right?
Yeah.
No, turns out it's not. People make the assumption that it's a sexual thing, but it's really, they're literally talking about bowls of meat. Like, when they were, and at the time, consider bowls of meat would have been an extravagance, right? So they are slaves in Egypt, but yet their tummies are full. They live in a house, or a dwelling of some sort. They've got a fire to keep them warm. They've got meat on their plate. I mean, life's not that bad.
So here's the interesting thing about the whole slavery in Egypt thing, because I've actually done quite a bit of research on this, and it's a little more.
Save me.
Yeah, it's a little. It's a little more complex, and it actually goes to for those people who are like myself, libertarians who would say taxation is theft or taxation is slavery.
Totally.
Wait till you get a load of this. So basically, the deal with Egypt was, and why they say, the pyramids weren't built by slaves and all of this. It's like
they were built by alien giants. Come on.
It's half right about the slaves. It's half right and it's half not, right? And the reason why would slaves get flesh pots? Like, that doesn't make sense. So here's the deal. As we said, the main form of agriculture is this agriculture in Egypt that relies upon the flooding of the Nile. So they have their calendar is actually set up in 3 seasons of 4 months, as opposed to our 4 seasons of 3 months each. Their first season of 4 months is the season of the flood. During this time, the Nile River floods its banks and basically covers up. It's from the rains that are happening in the highlands of Ethiopia, around Lake Tana, which is the source. It takes them a while to come down, floods the banks. So during this particular time, no agricultural work can be done. It's underwater. The farms are literally underwater. So the farmers, which is essentially everyone, have nothing to do. So what the way that they... It's really brilliant. The way that they enacted taxes was they had a corvée system of taxes. So basically what would happen was you would work for the pharaoh. If you were a laborer or something like that, you would work for the pharaoh during the season of the flood. And then you would be able to just tend your fields. He'd leave you alone. You would do what you wanted to do. So what's interesting about this is that it's like, okay, that's about 30% tax. So about 30% of your labor time you pay in taxes. This may sound familiar to people who pay income tax, but it's like you figure instead of paying the fruits of your labor, you just paid your labor 30%. So this was literally everyone during that time. This is how you paid your tax to the Pharaoh, was you did work. And you figure, like, because this was actually an interesting conversation that I had in like 2017 at Anarchapulco with this other Misesian, who we were like, this is when I first started thinking about it, where we were like, what if the pyramids were just like public works boondoggles? What if they just had to find something for people to do? Right?
I love that.
You reach a point where you just, like, why do we keep building pyramids? Well, we got to find something for people to do. We got to find something for the priests to do, the engineers to do, and the laborers to do. We've got these people. We've got them for 4 months. What are we going to put them to work doing? And it's like, over time, it's like, okay, well, here's this, and it becomes like this sacred, it becomes a bureaucracy again.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what else can we do? What can we put them to do? I mean, the choices of things to do in ancient Egypt is not that high. So it's like, we could build another pyramid. Fuck it, put them to work. Build another pyramid.
Not a lot of Netflix and chill.
No,
I guess.
not a lot
okay.
of Netflix and chill. So I think that, you've got people who, at that point, I can definitely see. It's an idle hand sort of situation where
Sure, yeah.
you've taken them out of a scenario where, and probably you had everybody working, but it's very likely, I would think, that you didn't work probably too hard during those times. It was kind of probably like if somebody got assigned community service, like picking up trash on the side of the highway. Nobody's really expecting you to work too hard. Just don't really slack off. You're not going to get whipped, but it's like, and here's your buddy from over here and he's working too. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you don't want to break your farmers. I mean,
No,
these
of course
guys
not.
need to deliver in a few
right.
months,
That's right.
and they got to go work in the fields.
That's
you don't
right.
want to break them down and,
No.
yeah. So I would think preserving your workforce would be a priority.
So that's, to give some context of like where they were at, you figure, you look at people now. It's like, well, I pay 30% income tax, but I get to go, like you say, I get to go home and Netflix and chill and, get to go out to the bar and have my
drive on
drink
these
and
awesome
get to
roads.
drive on the
Oh.
roads and do all this. So same sort of situation. It's like, well, no, I mean, I'm here, but, we've got all this infrastructure and for the time, compared to being out in the desert, they sure did.
Yeah.
So,
And that's the thing. They were really complaining about the desert sucks. Like,
Yeah.
Egypt wasn't that bad, and it was because of the, multiverse of gods that they had that Egypt wasn't that bad because, in their minds, it was like, oh, well, we have one god now and we live in a desert and everything sucks. We had 50 gods and everything was awesome and I could eat meat every night. So in their minds,
is that maybe a cargo cult that it's like maybe if we start worshiping these gods again, we can,
well, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, because there had to be somebody in that group who was like,
Yo, fuck this guy.
"What? Not even that. Not even that. It's like, well, no, you don't understand. It was the worship of the gods that got us all that stuff.
Yeah.
If we just start worshiping the gods again, well, it'll just appear again.
Right.
And the people were probably like, well, okay, yeah. Well, the priests have been saying that, so yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
That's where the golden calf came from.
Yeah, right,
because
right,
they
right,
wanted
right.
to build a golden calf so they could worship it and get all their stuff back.
Right.
That was the plan.
That's literally a cargo cult.
Yeah.
That's the first cargo cult. So cargo cultism is like that's just a natural human. That's just a natural human reaction to moving from abundance to scarcity.
And then Moses is off talking to God. He comes back. He's like, "What the fuck are you guys doing? What is this?"
Right.
And they're like, "Oh, we don't want your God anymore. We want this calf. It's going to give us meat." Yeah.
It's a very interesting. It's a very interesting thought. What I wonder is the sort of occult these occult sort of mystery school magic ideas that seem to permeate also through Judaism. Do they come from the Aten cult, or do they come from the polytheistic cult? It's where do you think that these ideas that are the sort of occult magical Egyptian concepts, do you think that they carried through the Aten cult, or do you think that they were completely locked into the polytheistic?
Oh, no. It was common because honestly, I mean, you had battles of the magician going on, right? So you had both Moses and Aaron, I think, also with their staffs, which turned to serpents. But then the Pharaoh called out his own magicians, and their staffs turned to serpents. And then, the serpents ate the other serpents.
What do you think that means?
Well, like from a technical standpoint, because Moses' staff became like a snake-looking serpent, but I think it was Aaron's staff actually became more of a like a small dragon, literally like a small four-legged dragon beast. So the two uses of the serpent are completely different. But there were magicians in the old polytheism. There were magicians also after that, because Moses himself was a magician, and he was the one promoting the monotheistic faith. And so he did a lot of magic. Now you can call it miracles, you can call it magic, but
so
he did a lot of magic.
Magic is separate from the religion then. So you've got the technology. So magic is this sort of technology.
Sure.
And they don't give that up when they give up the gods.
No, and I think the mystery schools were preserving the technology that they had. So here's an interesting thing, and this kind of goes to the technology thing. So one of the explanations for Moses, so Moses had a speech impediment or something, like he said that he was slow of speech. Do you recall that from the story?
I do, yes.
So he claimed to be slow of speech. He didn't like speaking in public because he had this speech impediment or something, right? Now, one theory is, well, it was because he spoke a different language than the other people because he was actually Egyptian, blah, blah, blah.
That would make sense.
Would make total sense. The other, traditional story is that as a child, a very small child, I think he was like 3, and he's sitting with the Pharaoh, and he reaches over and he yanks the crown off the Pharaoh's head and puts it on his own head. And Pharaoh's like, oh, we must put him to death, because, of course, that's the most logical thing to do. So the Pharaoh calls in his priests, and he's like, the dude snatched the crown off my head. I want to put him to death. And the priests are like, hold on a minute. So did he do it out of any sense of intent, right? And so they wanted to determine, did he do it on purpose, or is he just being a baby? Like, I'm surprised.
Is it a sign? They were saying, is it a sign, or is it just him being a baby?
Right. Is he just being a baby, or is this some kind of sign where he's a threat to your throne, blah, blah, whatever. Right. And, so they devised a test. And the test was that they would put 2 plates in front of Moses, one with fire, the other with gold. Mm-hmm. And whichever one he reached for, like if he reached for the gold, obviously he knows what he's doing because he's reaching for that gold. He wants the gold.
Right.
If he reaches for the fire, then he's just an idiot kid who doesn't know what he's doing, and he's going to burn himself.
Fair enough.
Here's where it gets weird. I mean, as if it wasn't already weird, but here's where it gets weirder. Apparently, Moses in the story reaches for the fire, picks it up with his hand, and puts it to his mouth.
Oh, that's crazy.
Tell me what kind of fire you can pick up with your hand and put to your mouth. What kind of fire is that? Define that for me.
Do you know what kind of fire that is?
I have no clue. No idea. Like, what the hell are they talking about? See, and this is what strikes me as a completely made up story, right? Like, it sounds great in Sunday school until you actually think about it. And you're like, wait a minute. How exactly does one pick up fire? Now, is it a hot coal? Well, in any event, whatever it is that he's picking up, he's going to drop a long time before it gets to his mouth.
Yes.
what the hell is he picking up?
Unless this is a completely other type of element that perhaps it's something that they would call fire, but is actually something that looks like gold or interesting.
Mercury?
Could be mercury. If you put it in his mouth, that would
explain why he couldn't talk so good.
Okay. Yep. That would be a poison.
Now, isn't there a red mercury?
There is a red mercury, yeah.
So if they had red mercury in a bowl and called it fire.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then they had another bowl full of gold.
Yep.
And they're like, pick one. And the kid's like, he doesn't know. So he picks the red mercury, sticks it in his mouth like all kids do. It's not going to hurt his hand.
No.
Right?
No.
So he's going to take a big handful, shove it in his mouth, and that's going to cause neurological issues.
That's going to be neurological damage,
yeah,
for sure.
Which is going to affect his speech, which is going to cause him to not want to speak to the public. See, now it makes sense.
I think that's an interesting idea, and it gets into, certainly, mercury was such a huge part of the alchemical tradition.
Oh, huge!
I mean, it was pretty much the main, because it was that bridge between sort of worlds, a bridge between states.
Yeah.
A liquid metal.
Get a liquid metal at room temperature. It does not get any better than that.
That's like, this is clearly, there's something special here going on, right?
Yeah.
But, so, of course, from alchemy is where we get chemistry and chemical and all of this. But what most people don't realize is that alchemy just means from Egypt. That's all it means. Alchemy. Just the same way as we've heard many of the nom de guerres, the war names of the Mujahideen, all of these Islamic guys who will go over and fight in jihad and whatnot. So it's like
assassin and Hashishim.
No. So you'll have a name. So you have your regular name, then you have your nom de guerre. So like the leader of ISIS is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So which means the guy from Baghdad. Baghdadi, al-Baghdadi, the guy from Baghdad. If you're an American, you'll be Muhammad al-Amriki. Al-Amriki, the American, right? Or Muhammad al-Libi. That means you're a Libyan. Right? So
and I had not heard this about alchemy. So what is the... So I get the al, but the
name of Egypt is Kemet. Kemet.
Oh, I have heard that. Okay.
That's what Egyptians called Egypt.
Oh.
Kemet. So it's alchemy is the...
You have just connected dots in my head. That's fantastic.
Alchemy is just Arabic for from Egypt. That's all it means. From Egypt.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely perfect sense. And considering... Really, every cool thing that we know came from Egypt.
Yes.
Literally. Like, I can't even start to tell you, like, all the stuff that other cultures get credit for that started in Egypt.
Oh, I mean, I think pretty much everything that is Western culture started in Egypt, but I think that it is because what is Egyptian... You had like this, Moses was definitely, and I think that this is what Freud is in some ways insinuating with Moses and monotheism, is this idea that the kernel of Western culture was carried from Egypt by this group, and that it lived inside of Judaism and then was expressed and evolved out through Christianity, which then took over Rome. And it's almost as though you had these two... So what we are living in now is the evolution of Egypt. Because you had certainly the Greeks take over. And you had... they took over the world. I mean, basically the Macedonians. And they took over Egypt. And then the Romans being a sort of extension of the Greeks. Now, it's hard to know, I mean, you have obviously this pantheon of gods that's traveling around the Mediterranean at that time. Pretty much every group has a pantheon, this pantheon of 12 gods, and they all are kind of similar in some ways. And so you have Osiris, and you have Zeus, and you have Jupiter, and so these are all kind of the same god and all of these things, right? So but there's something fundamentally different about this monotheism. And there's something different in I think the occult and sort of mystical side of what was continued to be carried through I'm not sure that it exists if Judaism doesn't exist. Like, I'm not sure that all of these things survive Alexander the Great and then survive the Romans. I think that they had a lack of mysticism. They were much more rational and materialistic in their approach. And that the mysticism, if we have mysticism in the West, which we clearly do because we're doing Destination Unknown. If we have an occult side, if we have a mystical side in the West, it's completely due to this exodus from Egypt. I would argue this.
I don't know that I would argue against it. I think that there are two aspects, right? So one, I think you have the religious story that is acceptable to the masses, and then on the other hand, I think you have the esoteric story that is for the initiates, for the adept. And so I think if you look at it in the two different,
but isn't that Egyptian in and of itself?
All of it
isn't that concept of having those two?
Yeah,
isn't that part of the mystery schools?
It is 100%, because that's where all of it comes from. So Egypt gave us everything cool, really, but like the mystery schools, the esoteric knowledge, the science, the first science,
right?
Like the real, good scientific study of anything occurred in Egypt. And it's really just the preservation and the methods that they use to preserve that knowledge through allegory and through, occult writings and the mystery schools, where it wasn't open to the public. And I think that's still very much a thing today. I mean, I challenge anybody to go open up a modern textbook on quantum physics and understand what the hell all those symbols mean. It takes an initiation. It takes some degree of learning to understand the symbolism, which comes from Egypt.
See, this is where I think there is a huge misattribution of Western culture to the Greeks.
Yeah,
and the reason I say that is because the core sort of tenet that we get from the Greeks about to whom does knowledge belong is knowledge belongs to everyone. Now you have certainly people like Pythagoras and whatnot who have cults that grow up around this knowledge that they're pushing out. But the thing is that they are pushing the knowledge out, and then the cult forms because they are publicly the goal of a Greek philosopher is to push his knowledge out into the world, whereas the goal of the Egyptian adept in the mystery school is to keep his knowledge hidden from the world. I think these are two diametrically opposed ideas of to whom does knowledge belong, and I think that so much of modern knowledge, as you said, at the highest levels, is about withholding. If you do not have the degrees, if you do not have the pedigree, if you do not have the certifications, you are not allowed to step foot.
If you don't know the lingo, you can't speak the language.
Exactly. Well, even having a lingo, right? I mean, this is something that I do often. That I mean, it's become a known thing that I just broke down this silly Russian indictment on my podcast, where it's like when there's no lingo, anybody can understand it. It's
Right.
only the lingo that doesn't even need to be there, that's in many ways absurd and ridiculous, that obfuscates simple concepts. So we're back to the hieroglyphics on stone in public.
Yep.
To where people just are like, I know that means something important, when it could just be like, fuck you guys, you can't read this. Like, it literally could be that.
It could be, but it's not, because the Egyptians were very good at distinguishing from the erudite class and the common class, and the people that had knowledge, insight, and could really inquire properly about the secrets. Those were the people that they were speaking to.
Are we going to open another bottle?
Oh, dude, yeah.
Okay.
What time is it?
Yeah, we got 45 minutes.
Oh,
Or 40 at least.
Yeah. 40 minutes is 20 minutes more than we need to drink a bottle of wine. I mean, we're going to
I don't know. We got out this one pretty slow, man. I don't know.
Oh, it's because this has been a fantastic conversation.
I see you've got a lot more, so why don't you take us on to our next step here?
Well, I don't have a lot more. What I've got are just some things. I like to tie things together. I like to, make connections where I can.
All right.
And connections that people may not always be aware of.
Cheers to you, sir.
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Always a pleasure.
It gets better every week. Like, tell your friends, tell your family, bring them all on.
Oh, and this week people could tell we are back to the old standby carnivore.
We had to buy our own
2015
wine.
cab.
Oh, my God.
What's funny is you brought over a bottle. Is yours a 2015 too?
I think it is, yeah. Yep, it is.
That's the old standby for us. I already had one here. But
Yeah, Vin's like, hey, can you grab a bottle of wine? I'm like, sure. We show up with the exact same wine.
exact same. So of course we had Glenn week before last, and then Christina last week. Anybody who's out there who's got a wine that they would like to contribute, 2 bottles is fantastic. 1 bottle is great as well. You can reach out to me, show@vinarmani.com, and we can do that. If you are a winemaker or you know of a winery, and you'd like to let them know, we'd love to share that with the people. So I will let you.
Whiner, if you will.
A whiner, yes. All right. So what do we got? What do we got on the plate? What do you have? Because it would be fantastic to actually be able to get through all of your things in one episode, because we always leave with like one page undone.
Yeah, there's always leftover pages.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's all right, because we can come back to them later. Okay, so we have kind of set up our paradigm here of Egypt being this incubator of occult knowledge. Mm-hmm. And for thousands of years, they developed occult knowledge, secret things that they kept just to the priestly class or the initiated. They had these mystery schools that were set up. They had mystery schools within mystery schools. I mean, they were the absolute best at doing this at that time, and maybe ever. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were phenomenal at creating this esoteric knowledge, which had tremendous value, and then segregating it from the general public. Mm-hmm. Right now, you brought up the Greeks. Now, I am almost in a position. I'm not fully sold on this yet, but I'm like 90% there. I would almost argue that a lot of the Greek philosophy is derived specifically from Egyptian philosophy, specifically the Memphian philosophy that was created in Egypt. So, interesting side note, Tutmosis, a priest in Memphis.
Okay.
So, I really do.
Now, Memphis is the capital at this time.
Well, right. So, it was the northern capital,
mm-hmm. Which is considered Lower Egypt.
Which by the time of Akhenaten,
it's a unified Egypt.
Yes,
at that point.
But Memphis was still a very important.
Okay, got it.
Center.
Right.
But so Tutmosis in Memphis as a priest, Akhenaten, in Cairo, I guess. I'm not sure where he was specifically, but
I think No, he established an Amarna.
Amarna, yeah.
Yes.
He did establish Amarna, but that was after he became
Right.
pharaoh. Very interesting story about Amarna. I mean, a lot of the stuff is just so it's weird when you really start breaking it down, and then you start adding to it, some other things like the mystery schools specifically. I believe that a lot of the knowledge that they possessed was handed down throughout the ages through symbolism, specifically through Masonic symbolism.
Go on.
So you're familiar with obviously with the Masons and the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, and the Shrine.
The Shriners.
Yes. Now, most people think of the Shriners as the fez-wearing, happy fellows that ride the little motorcycles in the parade, and they've got a free hospital for sick kids.
Yep.
They do amazing work.
Yep.
No criticism whatsoever of the Shriners. But do you know what the official name of the organization is?
No.
It is the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the Mystic Shrine.
Now, is the Mystic Shrine... What is the Mystic Shrine?
Well, let's break it down. The ancient Arabic.
Okay, so Arabia, we're there.
Yeah, we're yeah.
So that's why they wear the fez. That's why they have the scimitar and star as the symbol.
It's all very African. It's all very
right.
Egyptian there.
Okay.
So the nobles of the Mystic Shrine, and this really calls back to the mystery schools, and it wasn't just like hey, we're the ancient Arabic order of the regular dudes that hung out on the side of the road.
Right.
No, we're the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the Mystic Shrine.
Now, is this a Masonic sect?
It's not. I don't know if I call it a sect, but it's a Masonic organization.
Is it a Masonic? It's a Masonic organization.
Yeah, absolutely is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's a continuation, basically. So the way the Masonic organizations are set up is that you enter into what's called a Blue Lodge. They call it a Blue Lodge because they used to meet like once every blue moon. And you would receive your 3 degrees. So there was the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master mason. That is literally the highest degree within masonry that you can get. Now,
the third degree, you're saying.
The third degree. Now, and you've heard the old saying about...
give you the third degree.
Yeah.
That means they give you everything. They go at you full blast.
Oh, yeah, because it's difficult, right? Because if you do it old style, you have to memorize an incredible, a lengthy, basically a work. You have to memorize this entire thing. You have to interact. You have to, they give a line, you give a line, they give a line, you give a line, and it gets intense, especially when you consider all the other stuff that's going on around, and it is a very intense experience, and that's where that saying came from. When you give somebody the third degree, it's an intense, grueling experience if done properly. I will say that in recent times they've slacked off a bit, but
fair enough. That happens over time.
It does. I mean, people get lazy, and
of course.
it's like
Well, you were talking about hiring the bees and the C's.
Yeah, and it's not all masonry's fault. I mean, we have a populace that just isn't up for doing the
right.
the memorization and
Fair
all
enough.
the stuff. So when I went through it, it took months. When I went through, and now as I understand it, they have classes that you can go through in a weekend. And I'm like,
that's not cool.
That's just wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. So the point is that once you have achieved the third degree and you've completed it and you are now a Master Mason, there is no higher degree. Now, there are appendant degrees. So you can go from the 4th to the 32nd degree, or maybe the 33rd degree, in either the Scottish Rite or the York Rite.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It does not mean you're a better Mason, you're more of a Mason, anything else. All it means is that you have now had additional instruction in whatever branch you chose.
It's like the third degree is a black belt, but you could achieve different, you could be a 12th degree black belt. You could be a 20th degree. I wonder...
in a certain thing, too.
It's funny that they use the degree system for that as well. Strange. I mean, dan would be the Japanese word for it, but it's funny that that's translated to degree in English when that's clearly a Masonic thing. Strange. Interesting.
Yeah, and so you have the Scottish Rite, which is loosely based on a lot of the Scottish mythology, and then you have the York Rite, which is based on the English mythology, and then you have the Shrine. So in the past, and I don't know if this has changed. I think it may have changed recently, but in the past, you could not apply to join the Shrine until you had completed either Scottish Rite or York Rite. So you had to
it's
go,
even in addition to.
Yes, so they're all in addition to, right?
That's
so they build on each other. So you have your first 3 degrees, which is like your basic training. You are now a Mason. You're as much of a Mason as you're ever going to be. Then, if you choose, you can take a couple different paths to get some more enlightenment, additional knowledge, that sort of thing. And then once you take either of those paths and you complete those, then you can join the Shrine, which is all about the Egyptian mysteries.
Interesting.
So that's kind of the capstone on top of your Masonic education, which is already like overloaded with Egyptian symbolism. Then you get even more.
So it's a sort of a I think this goes to exactly what I was saying, is that so you can take, it's almost as though it's like a calling back to say, because you would think that if either the English mythology or the sort of Scottish mythology, if either one of them works to bring you back to the Egyptian mythology, that would seem to indicate that the Egyptian mythology is what's at the core of both of those anyway.
100%. Absolutely correct.
What an interesting. It's the hero with 1,000 faces. It's the idea that. Yeah. So there's, but then again, the question becomes: are these groups of people discovering it at the same time? Or is it carried through Rome? If it's carried through Rome, it's certainly not carried from the Egyptian side. It's carried through Christianity, if it's carried through Rome.
Why do you say that?
Well, because there's no... I don't think that you can draw a line from Egyptian polytheism through Roman conquest of England. But you can certainly draw a line from Christianity through... there's still Christianity in England.
Right, but we're not talking about polytheism. We're talking about the Egyptian sciences.
So how does this move? How do the sciences move?
There's no polytheism. There's no theism.
That's right.
In Masonry.
That's right. Okay.
Masonry is 100% about. I mean, we have an entire slide during one of the degrees devoted to Pythagoras. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well,
it's all about math and science, and it's about reason, and it's about logic, and those are really, I think, the hidden teachings.
So how do these travel then? How do they...
Through symbolism and allegory.
But I mean geographically. Like how do these things move through the empires? Is there a group of people that's moving them along? Is there are they just randomly carried along? At what point is there some organized group that's putting... I mean, I've heard Knights Templar. Obviously, there's a connection to Scottish Rite there for sure.
Yep. But a lot of that wasn't until later. I mean, the Knights Templar didn't come along until, 1100 or something. So there's a ton of... but the Knights Templar, they didn't come up with that stuff out of nowhere. They learned it. Right. And they learned it from these esoteric teachings that have been handed down from master to student throughout history. So how do we get from Egypt to really the rest of the world with these teachings?
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I really think that it comes to... so when Masonry made itself known in the 1700s, it had been described as something that had existed for thousands of years. but was just revealing itself publicly.
Well, clearly, it these are concepts that had existed. Now, was it saying that it had existed as an organization, or was it saying that it had existed in terms of the concepts contained within have existed and are now being sort of codified and put together? What was the idea there?
Well, so I think what they were saying was that the idea of Masonry and the teachings of Masonry had existed, coming together as a formalized, we're going to have a Grand Lodge, we're going to have this, we're going to have that.
Right.
That revelation of the formalization of the structure was fairly new, even though lodges had existed, so the whole lodge structure, the whole structure of it had existed, for a long time before they actually revealed themselves in the 1700s. So, even back to the Knights Templar, there's a lot about the Knights the structure of the Knights Templar, the organization, the hierarchy, that's reminiscent of Masonry. Even before that, there's organizations where there are certain parts of it that that carry through. Now, so I guess my theory about this is that it's not necessarily the organization, it's not the structure, it's the teachings. And the teachings that originated in Egypt have been handed down in some fashion through different methodologies. Masonry is one channel, right? We had alchemy. We had the teachings of, Hermes
Trismegistes.
We had these esoteric teachings that were handed down through various channels that all really were very related and said a lot of the same things. If you were attuned and you understood the lingo and you got the symbolism, they were all kind of saying the same stuff. It was just they were disseminated through various different channels.
So the question is, so we have and I think probably the next episode we should do alchemy, and because I know that you've got a John Dee thing, and
let's start with Isaac Newton.
Yeah.
Because he's one of my three.
Basically, the whole Enlightenment is a alchemical renaissance, and I guess we can get into that idea, but so you've got alchemy. It's definitely the birth of what we would consider to be modern, what becomes modern science, the scientific method. All of that is developed as alchemy sort of takes its place in history, which is a big place. There's a lot going on in Europe at the time that alchemy is really like almost at a religious. It's kind of like the it's as I say, the Enlightenment is a rebirth of alchemy because it's a rebirth of I really see the whole Masonic ideal as a that there's a line that you can draw from the alchemists to that, and without Masons, there's no United States, and without the United States, we don't have. We're not sitting in the world that we're sitting in. You know what I mean? Like that sets it all off.
So I think Masons get a bad rap because there are those that would ascribe various conspiracies or whatever to them. And I'm not saying that's out of the question. I'm saying anytime you have a secretive organization, you're going to have,
of course,
abuse, or you're going to have bad members, whatever.
Corruption. That's corruption, yeah.
But you have that in any organization.
Any organization, sure.
But generally, the tenets that are taught by Freemasonry are of tolerance and brotherhood and acceptance and religious tolerance when religious tolerance was illegal.
Right.
These guys were saying, hey, we're not a Christian organization. We want you to have a belief in a higher being.
How does that help with the work? How does that help with the scientific? I don't even want to use the term science. How does that help you to better discover the mysteries?
So what the belief in the higher being does is that it provides teeth for the oaths that keep the secrets
I see.
of the science.
Because if you don't think that anything bad will happen to you if you don't keep the oath, then the oath isn't worth anything.
Correct.
Okay.
So you have to have a fundamental belief in some power above yourself.
Right.
So that way, when you take an oath to that power,
That's interesting.
then there is some enforcement if you violate the oath and give away the secrets of the science that you're about to be taught.
See, now this brings up an interesting. This is setting off something for me, right? Because I don't even know where to classify myself on the higher being spectrum, right? I guess most people would probably consider me agnostic because I've done enough psychedelic drugs to not be an atheist. I don't think you can be if you've done enough of them and experienced enough things. And I've experienced just even outside of the psychedelic, I've had some experiences that told me that there's something else going on. So I'm maybe I'm a deist. I don't know where I would categorize myself, but I am someone who puts an extreme value on keeping my word.
Yes.
And I wonder, I've never thought about it before, and I've never had introspection on it before. Does that in and of itself necessarily mean that I believe in a higher power? Now, I've never thought about this before because I do have an extreme fear or negative reaction toward the idea that I might not keep my word. I wonder from where I think the consequences are going to come. It isn't from the individual that I might not be keeping my word to, because it's more than that. I wonder where does that mean that I believe in a higher power simply because I put such an extreme value on keeping an oath?
I don't know that that's necessarily needed. Like, 'cause I'm with you. I feel the same way. I feel like, I'm very much a word keeper. And the way I look at it is that I don't necessarily need a God to tell me I've done something wrong. If I've done something wrong, I know I've done something wrong, and I am going to feel bad.
Exactly. Yeah, you feel bad in and of yourself, right?
Yeah. Like, I don't need somebody else to tell me.
But why? I've never actually thought about this, and this will probably bug me for weeks or months or years, because there's no one punishing me but me, ostensibly.
Sure.
In
And that's
many
where the conscience
scenarios.
comes from.
Right,
I mean,
right,
this
right.
is the whole idea of the conscience and why
But
psychologists
is the
have
conscience
puzzled on
itself
that.
is the conscience itself a higher power?
I think it could be considered a higher power, or at least a higher measuring stick, right? I mean, there's a certain level of, like, if I said, oh, hey, there's $10 laying on the counter, I'm going to just swipe it and stick it in my pocket. Literally, if nobody sees me do it, there's
That's
no
what I'm saying.
consequences.
That's what I'm saying.
But I won't do it because
Right.
I will feel bad
Right.
about that. And, so to me, it's like, I will always know that I took that $10.
Yes,
I will
yes,
always
yes,
have
yes,
that
yes,
memory that I was, I was a thief. I was a bad person. I, betrayed somebody's trust because I took that. I think it's the knowledge, and I don't think you need necessarily like a biblical God to tell you right from wrong. I think people generally understand that if you have stuff and somebody takes your stuff, they've done a wrong to you, and you don't want to
people
repeat
understand that, though? That's the real question. Or because if people understood that, how would this notion of the God who punishes, how would that even have any utility at all? If this was something that was inherent that people believed, why would you even need a God who punishes you for doing bad things?
So that's an interesting question. I don't know. Is it because at one point in time we were just generally nastier people? I mean, were we just meaner to each other in the past?
I don't know. Well, I have said that I believe morality itself is an evolving technology. I have said this. I've presented talks on this idea that I think that morality is something that has evolved over time, and that we are still coming to try to understand it, but that, and maybe this is like the Jordan Peterson idea of what is the Old Testament God, that the Old Testament God is really an embodiment of the idea that there's a future and that you can bargain with it, and that part of bargaining with it is to, he said something. I went and saw one of his lectures, one of the biblical lectures, the original ones that he did in Toronto. I think there were only 7. I went and saw one of the ones where he was talking about Abraham. And he said something during that blew my mind, like to where it was one of those moments where I was like, I woke back up out of it and realized that he had been talking for 15 minutes and I had been like completely in my head because he like fuzzed me for a second. Where he I wrote about this in my book. He said, there is not a huge difference between your future self and another person. And so having behaviors or acting in the best interest of your future self is very much acting in the best interest of another person. So if you can act in the best interest of your future self, you're actually acting in the best interest of others. And so that if you want to be in the service of others, it is to be in the service of your future self with the largest and broadest scope available. And I was like, that is a really, really deep idea. The idea that myself a year from now is actually someone else. And if I do something that is going to benefit, if I save money, if I make an investment, if I make a good decision, if I go to the gym, if I do these things that will not benefit me, but that will benefit me a year from now, it is, first off, it's literally a different person. Like the molecules, the cells, it's a different organism than me.
What is it, every like 7 years your body completely changes out?
So that means that if you are making a 10-year investment plan, you are actually doing something for another human being. You are not investing money so that you will never spend it. The you in this moment will never ever spend it. You are investing money so that another human being can spend it. That's a very crazy concept. It's a very crazy concept about altruism, about delayed gratification.
Now that is a concept I think we have lost complete view of as a society. Our society,
delayed gratification.
Yeah, our society
because
is
we're in an instant. How could we have delayed gratification when the people who are checking us out right now are seeing us with like a 15-second delay?
Because they got to wait until next week to get the rest of the story.
But it's like you can have what you want when you want it.
Yeah, immediately.
And so it's, I think, if the notion of a higher power is another individual in some future time, even if it's just yourself, then we're living in a world that has absolutely killed God, if that's what God is. Because the instant gratification is like, that's the modus operandi. Like that's where we're at.
Yeah, but I think that there are people for whom delayed gratification still means something. I think that there are people who intentionally put off buying the new thing. Like, oh man, I want this set of golf clubs. I need to save money, blah blah blah.
Sure.
And they intentionally put it off until like next year. And then when they get it, it's like, yay, I got my golf clubs, woo! And that's fulfilling for them. But there are other people that have never grown up with that concept. And literally, we have kids today. They're not even, I mean, they're not even that young anymore. I mean, we have kids that.
They say millennials is anybody under 40 at this point.
True. But if we're talking about kids that grew up with actual good internet.
Right. With broadband.
Yeah.
For their entire life.
They've had the knowledge of the world at their fingertips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They're like, what, 13, 14, 15 years old?
Oh, I think even older.
Yeah.
Because they weren't using the internet. I mean, it's the question is, what age did you start using the internet? So you figure if see, I think when the generation that we will really see what the effects of all of this is what I call the tablet generation. Right? So it's the kids who grew up being able to hold and carry the internet with them, and I would say that that's probably born. I'm gonna say 2010 and late at 2010 and later. So they're kids. They're still kids at this point. But yes, the iPad tablet generation.
So they have the tablet of all knowledge in their hands,
and it belongs to them. See, that's another thing about it, is that like those are the ones who were raised where like it was actually their property.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a computer that was shared or a laptop or something like that. It was like, no, this is the thing we got for you, that you can do and explore the things that you want to do and explore on this thing.
Yeah. And it's magic.
And it's a magic tablet. It's which.
How does it work?
Well, this is when we get to the Arthur C. Clarke quote. Of course, that is any sufficient. What was it? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. And you're going to tell a 3-year-old that it's not freaking magic?
Of course it's magic.
God, it's like...
Of course it's magic.
Yeah.
And it's also supposed to just work.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, this is the end of the world. This is the end of the world that this thing doesn't work. Because you create a normalcy bias.
Right.
It creates a normalcy bias of, no, it just simply always works. It's different for those of us who literally there was no internet at a point of time that we remember. We remember that. I mean, I'm upset when there's no internet, but I do definitely remember, one, dial-up, right?
Yeah, dial-up.
But I also remember a time when it was like there was no internet.
No, I
remember
remember
just was no internet.
I remember like the concept of a phone book. I mean, explain that to a modern teenager.
No.
It's
I remember going to a payphone.
Yeah.
Pulling up
payphone.
Pulling up the phone book that was attached with a cord.
Yeah.
And it had the hard cover on it.
Yeah.
And you'd pull it up.
And you hope the page you wanted wasn't ripped out.
Wasn't ripped out because someone would have ripped it out. Yeah, absolutely. And you'd look for some business that you're looking for, or the fact that people had their name.
Yeah. Everybody had their name in the phone book.
phone book.
You had to opt out. Like your name was going in the phone book.
Yeah, you had to opt
unless you opted out and paid extra. So then what'd you do? Then you had to stick your hand in your pocket and come out with like a quarter or a dime or whatever it was at the time.
Stick it in.
And shove it in there and go,
and you might get a busy signal.
Busy. What?
They were on the phone, or they had taken it.
Where is your voicemail?
Or they had taken it off the hook. Because remember, you could pull the phone
off the hook, yo.
Yeah, you could pull. You didn't want anybody to call. You just pulled the phone off.
Yeah,
and it would beep for a while, and then it would stop.
Yep.
And then nobody could call you because you had taken your phone off the hook.
Yeah, there was no voicemail. There was none of that.
No. Voicemail. What are you talking about? That what is that? We had an answering machine.
Yeah. I worked for a law firm, and they just got voicemail, and this was back in, oh Jesus, what was this like? 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And voicemail was like new. Like
Brand
all
new,
the lawyers
yeah.
had voicemail. It was all run through a central, telephone system. Yeah, it was a big deal at the time. Wow, I'm old. Okay.
But the thing is, it's about taking things it's about normalcy bias.
Yeah.
And the idea that you expect things to work. And I'm in crypto, right? So it's like I'm constantly, it's funny to me that I have there is this layer for me of, and I recognize it every day, there is this layer for me of, this could be gone in an instant. Like this, I know that we're going to base our monetary system on this, right? So like, I know that for a fact. Like, I know that this is where everything is going. And I know that for the new generation, this is going to be a normal form of currency that they're going to have. Who knows how soon fiat goes out the window, or perhaps fiat moves itself over onto the blockchain, and who knows, right? But that this is not going to be a foreign concept to them. But I still have the idea that, like, man, it really can go away, because I remember a time when it wasn't here.
Yeah.
Like, the whole internet can shut down, because I remember a time when there was no internet.
Yeah.
But I think to go full circle on that, I wonder how many of these technologies that came through this Egyptian mystery school, that you imagine the same sort of scenario of monotheism and a time when there was no monotheism. The idea of God, something that we take for granted as a single God that is over everything, and we take it for granted that some percentage of people simply live their lives that way and that it will never go away, but that there actually was this time that we can point to and say, it started here when people first started thinking about this, believing it, and carrying on these ideas.
But there was, and I don't think you're trying, and I don't think this is what you're trying to say. I don't think you're trying to say that, the monotheism is superior to polytheism.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Or any theism.
They're technologies. They're technologies.
Well, sure, they're ways of dealing with the world, right? So if your method of dealing with the world involves invoking a higher authority or higher power to help you deal with your day-to-day existence, that's fine. I mean, everybody's got their thing, Some people drink a lot of wine.
That would be two people here. Cheers to that.
But it's just one of the ways people deal with life. And people have very personal relationships with their deities of all kinds. So whether you're talking about a monotheistic Christian style religion, you're talking about polytheism, you talk about Wicca, you talk about Satanism, you talk about literally any of the religions. People have very personal relationships with their deities.
Right.
And even, I would say, atheists have an equal amount of faith that there is nothing.
Right.
Because it takes an unbelievable leap of faith to say matter-of-factly, there is nothing beyond what we are experiencing and documenting in the scientific realm.
I think even more than that, the sad part about atheism is you absolutely have to deny yourself of certain experiences that have been part of the human experience since time immemorial. And mainly, again, I'm going to go back to psychedelic experiences. You cannot be an avowed atheist and be willing to experience, which is a real experience.
Yeah,
like it's really happening to you. You can, because the thing is, you can't do a heroic dose of mushrooms. You can't do ayahuasca. You can't do iboga and then walk away and be like, nah, there's nothing else. There's nothing else. That was in my head. What happened was in my head. You fucking can't. You can't smoke DMT and then be like, yeah, that was just neurons firing. That was all just in my. You can't.
So I would even say, even beyond this not beyond, but to a lesser degree than the psychedelic experience, is the childlike wonder.
Of course.
So I think, honestly, atheists to me seem so bitter and jaded that they can't even appreciate the childlike wonder. Maybe their inner child is dead. I don't know. But like, I still get super excited about, random stupid shit.
Dude, go to the Grand Canyon.
Oh yeah, I went to my buddy Jeff's house last week. See, this is how easy it is for me, right? Like, I go to Jeff's house and he straps a freaking 3D thing.
Oh, like a VR thing?
Yeah. I had never done this before.
Yeah.
And like, he's like, oh, check this out. You could like use a lightsaber and like chop things in half. I was like, oh my God, I'm inside Star Wars. This is the best thing ever. And then he's like, oh, now check this out. So you can actually paint in space. So I literally was standing in space and I had like a little stylus and I was like painting rainbows in space. That is very much like a psychedelic experience that you would have had to have accessed.
What do you mean very much like? That is a psychedelic experience.
It is, but you would have had to have used mushrooms or something in the past to get there. Now you use technology and it was so real.
See, if you want to be an atheist, you have to not deal with that. You have to push that into the background, because the fact of the matter is that that's not the end of where that technology goes.
Oh no, this is the beginning.
It's the baby steps.
Yeah.
And it's not very hard to see where that technology goes. So I do believe that what we're going to get from the atheists is we're going to get a new, like, these people say that they are all about science and technology and all of this. They are going to be the new Luddites. They will be, because as people start to move into these virtual spaces, and these are the things that Terence McKenna was talking about at the end of his life. Like, towards the end of his life, like, you go back and listen to, like, he was talking about, like, VRML. He was talking about how he was doing 3D modeling, because for the first time he was like, I can actually start to put into a 3D model that you can walk around in what my psychedelic experience is. When people who are talented artists, because there are already people who are great artists, like, who are doing ayahuasca, who do like ayahuasca paintings, that I'll look at them and I'll be like, that's fucking it. You've got it. People who do mushrooms too. There are people who have been doing the LSD ones for years, and it's like, yes, you've got it. People can go and check out a feature film that I produced called Expressway to Your Skull. You can check. Yeah, I executive produced it.
Dude, you didn't tell me.
Yeah, it's on. You could go on YouTube, type in Expressway to Your Skull movie. You could watch it on demand.
Guess what I'm doing tomorrow?
Yes, you will like it. But the reason why I think it's so great, Michael Oakham is the writer and director, but he's his specialty is he's a visual effects guy. The story is great. The acting is actually really, really good. But why I was the most interested in it is he was able to depict a mushroom trip, because a lot of it's about psychedelic mushrooms. How he shows the mushroom visuals on screen it's exactly what anybody who's done mushrooms will be like, holy shit, how did he do that? That's unbelievable.
I gotta see this.
It's a really cool. It's a psychedelic kind of like horror slasher film. It's a cool one.
Slasher? I don't like horror.
It's not. It's not. I mean, it's not. It's. You'll dig it. It's
all right.
It's psychological. It's psychedelic. Expressway to Your Skull Are we done?
We're done.
At least I got to plug my movie.
That's the thing, though. It's like there's never enough time.
There's never enough time. So are we doing Alchemy next week?
Yeah, let's do Alchemy.
Okay, we'll do Alchemy next week with more wine. Hopefully we can have some alchemical wine.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Wine sponsor would be good.
Yeah.
Anything else you've got, dude, or are we gonna take off?
This has been awesome.
As always, always a pleasure. All right, so episode 5 is done. We're on to episode 6 next Friday. We'll see all of you guys live. Thank you guys. iTunes, Stitcher, we're there. Check out the podcast. Be sure to download it. You'll catch something every single time you listen, so you can feel
There's a
free
lot
to listen
here.
again. There's a lot here. There's always a lot.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Send us questions.
Yes. Oh, yes. Please send us questions. We love to hear them. Comments are always great. We do answer. So thank you guys. We will see you next time on Vid and Dave's Destination Unknown.